Welcome to Everyday Economics, the podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Krug, president of the 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network. You can listen to all of our podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics, please make your tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We are recording today's episode on Friday, September 8th. And joining me as always, my friend, my colleague, the esteemed Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD economist. Dr. O, great to be with you. Want to jump directly into the comments of former Fed President from St. Louis, James Bullard. He's now landed as a dean at Purdue University. He was on with CNBC this week, offering insights on where the puck is headed in this economy with regard to rates. And you and I just both listened to the tape. Fascinating guy. And I think, now that he's, out in the real world and free and untethered, he has a point of view and he's not afraid to express it. So where's the puck headed, my friend?
Well, let me tell you something. Never bet against Bullard. He's a smart fella. And yeah, I'm glad to hear his thoughts, now that he's not at the Fed. But yeah, I mean, Bullard is basically saying, look, the rate path at the Fed was, the story was, some members expected a recession, others expecting a big slowdown in economic growth, in economic activity. And so, they use that to justify the fact that, rates, the path for rates going forward may be pause, maybe even cuts in 2024. But the U.S. economy looks like it's, moving forward, that, it's growing again. I mean, GDP now from the Atlanta Fed was somewhere around 5% for the next quarter. So, I mean, the economy is definitely hotter than it was in the second quarter or even in the first quarter of this year. And so how do you justify pausing now and maybe even cutting next year is the question Jim Bullard is asking. Ultimately, I think the Fed has some homework to do. But I tend to disagree with the idea that the U.S. economy is reaccelerating. I mean, yes, GDP, but let me say that again. It's not that the economy is not reaccelerating, is that inflation is not reaccelerating.
Oh, okay.
I disagree with the idea, the notion that we're going to see GDP increase and that inflation is going to be surging higher.
Well, what's
again.
the other, for the benefit of people that are trying to make sense of this lever and what that means? Why would you need to care? I mean, why?
Totally. I mean, look. The economy is coming into better balance. Ultimately, what you want to do is you want to see nominal GDP. So the difference between nominal GDP and real GDP is basically prices. And and you could think of them as demand and supply. What you want to do is you want to see demand come down, but you also want to see supply inch higher, so that demand and supply can come into better balance, right? Ultimately, that's the rebalancing that you want to see after the COVID-19 shock. We're in a world where demand exceeds supply, and so the balance needs to be restored. And ultimately, the problem for the Fed was that they thought, and correctly so, by the way, that they had to bring down demand a lot. And the reason they had to bring down demand a lot is because the supply side was constrained by, we had the supply chain issues, constrained by the demographic factors that constrain labor supply, right? That constrain the number of workers that are willing and wanting to work. And so, totally correct that we have this supply constraint. But what you saw in the last few months is, especially in the last jobs report, and I mean, you're also seeing this in the housing market, you're seeing supply finally slowly catch up to demand. Demand has slowed a lot. The Fed has put the brakes on to slow down demand. And now you see supply catching up, slowly inching up. There's still a gap, for sure. But the gap is much smaller than it used to be, which is why we saw inflation come down from roughly 9% to about 3.2%, And of course, yes, the gap is still wide, right? We still have PCE at 4%, year over year. And that core PCE needs to go down to about 2%. Okay. And in the last PCE report, we saw disinflation had basically stalled, right? We had price growth at 0.2% month over month, stuck there, not moving lower, right? And so I understand the concern, but I doubt that we're going to see demand increase again and move further away from supply. I think we're stuck in this level right now. And perhaps to some extent, Jim is right in the sense that policy needs to be a little bit tighter, potentially a little bit tighter, in order to bring inflation down even more. Or we need to get very clever about how we're going to fill the gap on the supply side, right? In the housing market, demand basically bottomed back in December of 2022 and has been on an uptick since, right? But now we're getting to this time of the year where, by the way, people move in the spring. And so we're getting to this time of the year where you're moving into the late summer, fall, where demand cools. And then we had the market traders doing the job for the Fed because, look, we have the 10-year Treasury increasing much higher. I think last time I checked, it was 4.269, almost 4.3%. We have mortgage rates increasing up to roughly 7.3, 7.4% last time I checked, right? All of these factors are acting to cool demand in the housing market, even more so than demand would have cooled under normal circumstances due to seasonal factors. And so you have all of these factors moving demand lower and allowing supply to catch up. It's like I heard this really cool analogy the other day. It's like a moving train and trying to catch a moving train. The train is slowing down and supply is just moving higher and higher. You got a bunch of units under construction on the builder side. Those units are going to come on the market and kind of help to restore the balance a little bit more between supply and demand. And of course, that's important. Why is that? Why am I talking about the housing market? Because the housing market is so important. We know rent is about 40% of core CPI. And so, of course, the fact that rent growth is slowing, that we may even get into negative year-over-year rent growth territory, which I think would be amazing for renters. But ultimately, builders have built all these apartments. We had multifamily starts on the tear, right? And now multifamily starts are down, but then single family starts have increased again. Really, the key is in the housing market. And we know that CPI is slow to reflect market rent developments. And we know market rents have come down substantially, right? And so I think that that's going to weigh down on the inflation measures and continue to weigh down on the inflation measures. Also, the last point I have to make is that we need to continue to build widgets. If the more stuff we build, right, the less likely we're going to face higher and higher inflation pressures. If demand is still above supply, increasing supply is how you close the gap, right? We need to build widgets and we need to build them more efficiently. So we need both a combination of more workers, but we also need, in other words, we need the employment numbers to keep increasing. And they're increasing. They're just increasing at a slower pace, right? We need the employment numbers to keep increasing. We need the number of workers to keep increasing so wage growth doesn't push prices higher. And of course, we need a little miracle productivity. And right now, we're getting a little bit of all of these factors are coming into play. The last jobs report was absolutely amazing. right? All of these factors are coming together nicely. The question is, can we continue? Can we keep that going? Especially in light of fiscal policy that is still too loose and likely to push demand higher. So this is kind of what's going on right now. It's kind of the breakdown of essentially why I think, Bullard has a point, but why I think inflation is likely to continue to tick lower, or at least stay where it's at, but not surge back to the levels that we saw last year when it reached, crazy numbers, like 9%, numbers that we hadn't seen in more than 40 years.
It's great to see James Bullard out in the wild doing his thing, and obviously it was a great conversation starter. Thanks, as always, Orphe. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of quality podcasts at americastalking.com.